I first heard about Aisha Suleiman's disappearance from a retired police officer in Kaduna, Nigeria. It was late at night, and we were sitting outside a small roadside cafe, the kind where the only sounds are the distant hum of motorcycles and the occasional rustling of leaves. The officer, his name was Musa, had been on the force for over 30 years. His hands, thick and calloused, trembled slightly as he lifted his tea. His eyes, dark and heavy with age, seemed to hold a story he had buried for too long. He hesitated for a moment, glancing around as if checking to see who was listening. Then, after a long sigh, he began to speak in a low voice, almost a whisper. "I still see her face sometimes," he murmured, his fingers tightening around the cup. "That girl, she never should have married him." His voice carried a weight that made the night feel colder, and I leaned in closer, listening intently. Aisha Suleiman was a girl full of dreams, the kind of girl who wanted more from life than what tradition allowed. She was 19, bright, and known for her kindness and intelligence, always carrying a book under her arm. She had finished secondary school and dreamed of continuing her studies in Lagos, maybe even abroad, where she could become a lawyer. But her dreams didn't fit the reality of her family's expectations, and in their world, daughters didn't choose their futures. Her father, Alhaji Suleiman, was a respected businessman, the kind of man whose word was law in his household. When he arranged for Aisha to marry Bashir Gombe, a wealthy trader nearly 30 years older than her, there was no room for argument. The wedding was planned within months, an extravagant event that left no doubt about the power and wealth of both families. Aisha smiled for the cameras, but those who knew her well saw the fear in her eyes. She was trapped, a bird with clipped wings, caged in a life she never wanted. Bashir Gombe was an imposing man, the kind whose presence filled a room even before he spoke. He was tall, broad-shouldered, always impeccably dressed in fine kaftans and gold-rimmed glasses. In business circles, he was respected, but among those who whispered in the shadows, his name carried a different weight. Some said his first wife had died under suspicious circumstances, but no one dared to ask too many questions. Others claimed his third wife had simply vanished one day, gone without a trace, her name erased from family records. But wealth speaks louder than rumors, and in the eyes of Aisha's family, this was a match made in heaven. Aisha begged her mother in hushed whispers late at night, pleaded with her elder brother Yusuf to intervene. But tradition was heavier than her tears, and soon she found herself in a house that felt more like a prison. 3 months later, Aisha was gone. It happened on a humid night, the kind where the air felt thick, suffocating, pressing against the skin like an omen. Bashir claimed that she had left on her own, slipping away in the dead of night, taking only a small bag of clothes and some jewelry. He told the police that she had been unhappy, restless, and had probably run away to start a new life somewhere far away. "You know how young girls are these days," he had said, with an almost bored expression, as if losing a wife was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. At first, the police believed him, filing her case as a missing person with no sense of urgency. It wasn't uncommon for young brides, forced into marriages, to flee, and without evidence of foul play, there was little they could do. Her family was heartbroken, but in time, even they started to accept the possibility that she had left willingly. But those who knew Aisha refused to believe it. Her best friend Zainab was one of them, a girl who had known Aisha since they were children. She went to the police station repeatedly, demanding that they investigate further, refusing to accept the easy answer. "Aisha would never leave without telling me," she insisted, her voice cracking under the weight of her grief. "She didn't even have a phone. How would she have planned an escape?" Her mother, Fatima, stopped eating, barely spoke, sitting for hours in the same chair, staring at the door as if waiting for her daughter to walk back in. People whispered that she knew something, that a mother always knows when her child is dead, even when there is no proof. The days turned into weeks, then months, then a year, and slowly, Aisha's story faded from public conversation. The whispers quieted, the unanswered questions buried under new scandals, new tragedies. And then something happened. It was a maid who uncovered the first real clue, a young girl named Halima, who had been working in Bashir's house for only a few months. She was quiet, kept her head down, and did her work without question, just as she had been taught. Until one night, she fled, barefoot and trembling, arriving at the police station in the middle of the night. Her clothes were torn, her eyes wild with terror, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke. "She's still there," she said, her hands shaking violently as she clutched her arms. "She never left." At first, the officers dismissed her as hysterical, thinking she had been frightened by some ordinary household dispute. But then she told them something that made their blood run cold. "There is a room in that house that is always locked," she whispered. "At night, I hear knocking from inside. I hear someone crying." When the police arrived at Bashir's house the next morning, he greeted them with his usual calm, an amused smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Search all you want," he said, stepping aside as if he had nothing to hide, as if their presence was nothing more than an inconvenience. Room after room, everything was pristine, decorated with wealth and power, a house that spoke of success. But then they reached the door, a single wooden door at the far end of the house, different from the others. It was old, scratched, covered in dust, as if it had been forgotten by time itself. "Open it," an officer demanded, his voice firm, cutting through the silence like a knife. Bashir hesitated for the first time, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached for the key. When the door creaked open, a foul smell hit them, thick and rotting, curling into their noses like the scent of something long buried. Inside was a small, windowless room, the kind that wasn't meant for the living, a place where light had never touched. The walls were covered in scratches, deep and desperate, lines carved by broken nails, by hands that had fought against the darkness. Some marks looked like words, half-formed, as if someone had tried to leave a message but never finished. In the corner of the room sat a wooden box, locked tightly, its surface worn from years of neglect. They forced it open, the hinges groaning in protest, revealing what lay inside. Neatly folded was Aisha's wedding attire, untouched, her veil still carrying the faint scent of perfume. And something else, a human finger bone, small and fragile, its edges rough as if it had been broken. Bashir was arrested, but in Nigeria, power and wealth have a way of silencing justice, of bending truth until it no longer resembles reality. He denied everything, repeating the same story, his voice unwavering, his face unreadable. "She ran away," he insisted, his gaze cold, empty. "The box is just a memory of her. I kept it because I missed her." There was no body, no proof of murder. The forensic tests were inconclusive, the scratches on the walls, the missing finger. They were disturbing, but not enough. Within a year, Bashir was released, his wealth ensuring that his name remained untarnished. He left the country for a while, then returned, remarried, continued his life as if nothing had happened, as if Aisha had never existed. But the people of Kaduna never forgot, and even now, those who pass by Bashir's house say they hear something at night. A soft knocking, like someone trapped inside, still trying to escape. The retired officer, Musa, finished his tea and looked at me, his eyes heavy with years of regret. "That case, it was the one that haunted me the most," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what happened. We all do. But knowing and proving, those are two different things." He sighed, looking toward the empty road, where the wind carried whispers of the past. And for a moment, I thought I heard it too. A soft knocking, somewhere in the night.